When people think of the samurai, they imagine warriors in armor, katana flashing in the sun, riding into battle for honor and glory. But what often gets overlooked is how these warriors actually lived day to day. For centuries, the samurai were not just fighters. They were part of an entire economic system that sustained them, fed their families, and defined their role in society. Without money, land, and resources, there would have been no samurai class at all. The foundation of the samurai economy was rice. In Japan's feudal system, rice wasn't just food, it was currency. Land was measured by how much rice it could produce, expressed in units called koku. One koku was roughly the amount of rice needed to feed one person for a year, about 150 kilograms. Samurai didn't typically farm the rice themselves. Instead, they received stipends or payments in rice from their lords, the daimyo, who controlled the lands. These stipends were their salaries, their lifeline. The size of a samurai's stipend depended on rank and service. A high-ranking retainer could receive thousands of koku a year, while a low-ranking foot soldier might earn only a fraction of that. This system tied the samurai's loyalty directly to their lord's land and harvest. If the crops failed, the samurai suffered. If the daimyo prospered, so did his warriors. Samurai were expected to live in castle towns near their lords, where they could be summoned for military service at any time. This meant they were cut off from farming or producing goods themselves. They relied entirely on their stipends, which created a unique dynamic. The samurai were warriors first and foremost, but economically they were dependent. They lived like salaried officials, sustained by the peasants who worked the fields. This system created both stability and tension. On the one hand, it allowed the samurai to dedicate themselves fully to martial training, philosophy, and governance, without worrying about farming. On the other hand, it made them vulnerable. A daimyo with weak lands or poor harvests could not pay his men properly, and discontent could spread quickly. Loyalty was sacred, but hunger had a way of testing it. The Tokugawa shogunate, which unified Japan in the early 1600s, formalized this stipend system. Under Tokugawa rule, the samurai became a hereditary class, supported by rice stipends, forbidden from farming or engaging in commerce. Their role was to serve as administrators, soldiers, and bureaucrats. They were a warrior class without land of their own, entirely tied to the fortunes of their lords. Yet rice itself was not convenient for daily life. Samurai could not pay a carpenter or buy clothing with bags of rice, so merchants entered the picture, converting rice into coin. Samurai would bring their stipends to rice brokers who gave them money in exchange. This created a dependency on merchants, which was ironic because samurai saw themselves as morally superior to traders, who were considered the lowest class in Confucian social hierarchy. Still, when a samurai needed new armor, a sword, or even seke, he had to go through the very merchants he despised. The merchant class grew wealthy as a result. They controlled the cash flow, while samurai often fell into debt. A samurai might have honor, a stipend, and a sword, but without good management, he could find himself borrowing from merchants to maintain his lifestyle. Some samurai became trapped in cycles of debt, forced to pawn their weapons or rely on credit. This economic contradiction, warriors dependent on traders, would become one of the great tensions of the Edo period. For the average low-ranking samurai, life was far from luxurious. Many lived modestly in small homes, surviving on limited stipends. Their wives and children often had to manage household affairs carefully, stretching rice and coin to cover clothing, education, and supplies. Some samurai secretly engaged in side work, teaching martial arts or calligraphy, even though such activities were frowned upon. A samurai was supposed to live by his stipend alone, but reality often forced compromises. High-ranking samurai lived differently. They enjoyed larger stipends, fine homes, and the prestige of serving close to their daimyo. Their households had servants, and they could afford luxuries like lacquerware, silk, or tea. Still, even they were bound by the stipend system. Their wealth was not theirs to expand freely. It was tied to their lord's fortunes. One of the most fascinating aspects of the samurai economy was the sankin kotai system, or alternate attendance, imposed by the Tokugawa shogunate. Daimyo were required to spend alternating years in Edo, the shogun's capital, while leaving their families there as hostages when they returned home. This system forced them to maintain lavish residences in Edo and their home domains, doubling their expenses. To fund this, daimyo leaned heavily on their samurai retainers and taxed peasants more harshly. The samurai, in turn, often bore the burden of higher costs of living in the capital, further straining their stipends. This cycle had long-term consequences. Samurai were expected to uphold their dignity, to present themselves as noble warriors, but behind the scenes, many struggled financially. Letters and records from the Edo period describe samurai pawning their armor, borrowing from merchants, or even selling family heirlooms to make ends meet. The image of the proud warrior did not always match the reality of economic hardship. At the same time, the samurai were not just consumers, they were part of governance. Many served as tax collectors, magistrates, and administrators in their domains. They enforced the collection of rice from peasants, ensuring that stipends could be paid. In this way, the samurai were both protectors and oppressors, standing between the daimyo and the people. Their economic survival was directly linked to the toil of the farmers. The reliance on rice also made the samurai economy fragile. Bad harvests could spark famine, rebellion, or economic collapse. When crops failed, stipends shrank, and samurai found themselves desperate. Unlike merchants, they could not turn to trade for profit. Unlike peasants, they could not farm their own food. Their rigid role left them with few options, and this vulnerability would become one of the seeds of their downfall in later centuries. As the centuries passed, the cracks in the samurai economy widened. What had once been a system of loyalty and stipends turned into a trap of debt and decline. The peace of the Tokugawa era, which lasted more than 200 years, meant fewer wars. Samurai no longer had the chance to win glory or land on the battlefield. Instead, they became bureaucrats, tax collectors, and administrators. Their lives shifted from swords to scrolls, but their stipends remained the same. Inflation slowly eroded the value of rice stipends. Prices for goods in castle towns rose, while stipends often remained fixed. A samurai who could once support his household comfortably found that his rice no longer went as far. To keep up appearances, many turned to borrowing. Merchants became indispensable, lending money to samurai at interest. Soon, the warrior class, once proud and feared, found itself at the mercy of shopkeepers and traders. The irony was striking. The samurai considered merchants the lowest class in Confucian order, beneath even peasants. Yet these lowly traders now held the purse strings of the warrior elite. Samurai could threaten merchants with their swords, but they could not erase their debts. To preserve face, samurai families sometimes arranged marriages with wealthy merchants, blending honor with commerce in ways that would have shocked their ancestors. By the late Edo period, stories of impoverished samurai were everywhere. Some had to sell their armor, heirloom swords, or even their rights to stipends. Others opened private schools, teaching martial arts or calligraphy to make extra income. A few turned ronin, masterless and desperate, wandering in search of employment. The proud image of the samurai was fading, replaced by the reality of a class struggling to survive in a changing economy. The arrival of the West in the mid-19th century only made things worse. New technologies, new weapons, and new forms of trade reshaped Japan's economy. Merchants grew even richer, while samurai stipends became increasingly obsolete. Guns and cannons required cash, not rice. Factories and modern armies demanded money, not honor. The rigid system that had once sustained the samurai was now holding Japan back. When the Meiji Restoration began in 1868, the end of the samurai class was sealed. The new government sought to modernize Japan rapidly, building railroads, industries, and a Western-style military. The old rice stipend system was abolished, replaced with government bonds. For samurai, this meant the end of their guaranteed income. Many who had lived their whole lives dependent on stipends suddenly found themselves without support. Some adapted, becoming officers in the new imperial army, businessmen, or teachers. But many could not. They had no experience in trade or farming, and their pride prevented them from embracing lesser professions. Poverty among former samurai was widespread, fueling unrest. Rebellions like the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by Saigo Takamori, were fueled not just by loyalty to old ways but by economic desperation. Samurai who had once stood at the top of society now found themselves at the bottom, struggling to survive in a world that no longer valued their swords. In the end, the fall of the samurai was not just a story of politics or war, it was a story of economics. A class built on rice stipends and honor could not withstand the pressures of inflation, debt, and modernization. Their dependence on merchants, their inability to adapt, and the rigid structures of Tokugawa rule all contributed to their decline. Yet their legacy endured. The samurai may have lost their stipends, their swords, and their official place in society, but their ideals of discipline, loyalty, and perseverance continued to inspire. In many ways, their struggles during the economic shifts of the Edo and Meiji periods only made their story more human. They were not invincible warriors untouched by the world. They were people, caught between tradition and change, honor and survival. The samurai economy teaches us a profound lesson. Even the strongest warriors cannot escape the power of money, trade, and change. In the end, rice and gold proved just as decisive as swords and armor, and it was not on the battlefield but in the marketplace that the samurai finally fell.